All right, everybody. In this lesson, we're going to wrap up our layouts. And what we're going to do here is a fluid multi-column layout. So what I have here is just a blank HTML template, so kind of very similar to the single template, but I've taken our content section out. So if we refresh over here, you can see that it's just a header and a footer, and our section here is completely empty. So what I want to do is add a few articles to here. So this might be an interesting way to lay out a blog. So in each article, we'll do a little bit of lorem ipsum, but I want to make it smaller. Okay, so here's the general layout. We've got our main section. Within that section, we have an article, and within that article, we have paragraphs. We could even do something like a quick title here. And let's take a look at this. Okay, pretty much as expected, takes up the entire width of the page, because if you notice up here in the CSS, we only have a margin set on our wrap, so it's just going to expand the full width of the page. So what I want to do is I want to add a bunch of these articles. So I'm just going to copy and paste this over and over. Let's see what that gets us. Okay, that'll work. As many as you want, at least a few rows though. So now we have a bunch of these articles, and these could be little excerpts from a blog. And right now this is a little overwhelming and it doesn't look very good. So an interesting way we could approach this layout would be to do some kind of a fluid grid, some fluid squares that will expand and contract and shrink depending on how big the browser window is. So we can achieve this in a few ways. First of all, I like to set just a small amount of margin along the outside of the page. So maybe not even that much, maybe even like 3%. And this just gives us a nice little bit of white space on either side. And you can even tell already just from doing that one little bit of margin how much cleaner that looks and how much easier it is to read when you can see the gutter in the page here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make each of these articles a little bit smaller. And the reason we need to do that is because they're not all going to fit the way they currently are. So we want them to take up a fixed amount of space. So if we go down that path, let's say we want the articles to be, there to be 4 articles per row. So in that case, we'd want to set the width to 25%. So now all the sections kind of suck into 25%. But because they're not floating, remember, if we look at in our web inspector, and we hover over, let's see if I can make this work. There it is. So you can see, remember that this is still blocking the entire width of the page because it's not floated yet. So what we want to do is we want to float all of these articles to the left. And the result is going to be a nice grid-like layout. Now there's a few problems with this layout. First of all, we need to add some padding and spacing in between each of these cells, if you will. The second problem is it's not necessarily ideal that it shrinks down that way. It might be a little bit nicer to have the layout go to 3, then down to 2, then down to 1, so that the sections can maintain their size. So before we get into that, let's first add some padding and margins around these. So first and foremost, we need to add a little bit of padding. And if we take 2 percentage points off of that width and add it in padding, now remember, when we add 1 pixel of padding, it's adding it on the left and the right. So we have to account for that in our overall width. Excuse me, this should be a percentage. There we go. Okay, so let's see what that did for us. All right, that works. That looks a little bit better. So we have some spacing going on. And maybe we can even do something like light gray. There we go. And we can also add 1% of margin. We can cut this width down a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. It's not perfect, but it will work. So now our layout's looking pretty good and everything's where it needs to be, but it would be really nice if it could collapse a little bit better as we make it smaller, because this isn't necessarily ideal for these to get scrunched. I mean, if you were looking at this on a mobile phone, you know, it might be here, and that's not very readable at all. In fact, that makes your site completely unusable. So that's not ideal. So what we can do is we can switch from a fixed width to, or excuse me, from a fluid width to a fixed width. So the way we do that is, first of all, let's make some fixed margins and padding. And then let's change our width. Let's give it a specific width. Let's try 200 pixels and see what happens. So that's pretty good size. Let's see what happens when we expand and contract. So it has the effect that we're looking for. So now, as you can see, as the browser expands, the article sections wrap down below. So this is really nice because we could go from a really big monitor all the way down to a really small monitor, and we're not losing any resolution on the actual readable bit, and our website is kind of adapting or responding to the screen resolution that it's being looked at, if that makes any sense. Okay, so you could even go a little bit larger on these depending on your screen size. Remember, this is kind of artificially small because it's in my sidebar here. So one last thing to remember in a situation like this is our poor footer doesn't ever get any love in situations like this. Look at it stuck up here in the corner. So what we want to do is we want to float, or excuse me, we want to clear both, and that will get rid of, that will put the footer down below. So it'll clear all of this junk no matter how far we expand things out. So there you go. That's your fluid multi-column layout. It's kind of a responsive layout. It's not a fully responsive design, but it does adapt pretty well to large and small screen sizes, so it works really nicely in specific occasions. You can't use this type of layout for everything. It really only works in some type of magazine layouts and blogging situations, and you could also replace this text with images, particularly responsive images that will scale, and this makes for a really nice photo gallery that will also display really well on a large screen and on a mobile device. So those are the layouts we're going to cover this week. This is in no way a complete list of all the different types of layouts you can do in CSS. Really, any type of layout that you can get to work in most of the browsers could be considered a CSS layout. So the possibilities are pretty endless, but this gives you an idea of what can be done, and hopefully you'll be able to think a little more creatively about how you want to lay out your content for your sites.